Are we going to close the door? Bad feng shui. Keep the energy in. Well, something like that. Okay. 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 So here we all are together. Some of us have met, haven't we? Some of us haven't. Okay. I can't see you then. Leave your chair if you want to see me. If you further watch the tour, that's fine. You can move over. You come to this thing? Oh, then you come. I'll move over. Okay, we'll do it. Okay, so let's have a little chat. Let's listen to what Buddha says about a few things. And why are we going to listen to what Buddha says? Well, we're going to listen to see if there's something useful. You know? It has to be practical. If what we're going to listen to is not practical, then it is truly a waste of time. It's like if you come to cooking class, but you walk out with no recipes. I mean, you'd demand your money back, wouldn't you? Well, the same here. There's got to be some recipes from this. There's got to be some tools that that you're listening with that in mind. Something useful to take away, to apply in your daily life. And where you apply these recipes, of course, is in your mind. In your mind. And why? Well, to help us become a little bit less neurotic, less miserable, less depressed, less angry, more brave, more patient, and more useful to others. That's the bottom line, you know. So we'll sing a little prayer. The first two lines is expressing, for those of us in this room who kind of figure they're Buddhists already, it's reminding us of our reliance on the Buddha and his methods. And the second two lines are this motivation. We're going to listen to some tools. Why? So I can, make myself a better person. Why, in turn, that, so I can be a benefit to others. Minimum. Bare minimum. Just that, So let's think that way. Sing this little prayer. If you know it, please join in. Sangye charam choke chognam la janchu barudak nikyam suchi jagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drompa shu. Instead of, in the third line, instead of saying jinsog, you say chö nyen, from listening to the teachings. Chö nyen. Sangye charam soke chognam la janchu barudak nikyam suchi Dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drompa sho. Sangye charam soke chognam la janchu barudak nikyam suchi Dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sangye drompa sho. Love and attachment, right? Is that the plan?
Yes.
Okay. Alright, good. Okay, so first, in order to, we know those words. We all know the word love and we all know the word attachment. But if we asked each of us our definitions, I bet you everybody would have a different definition. So we really better be on the same page, because this is where these words, we often assume we're communicating. But the same words have different definitions, don't they? If you learn, if you're learning geometry, there's a thing called flat. There's a flat table. But if you're learning music, there's a thing called B flat. Well, if you don't know the definitions, you'll be very confused, won't you? If you have the geometry in your mind when you hear about B flat, you'll be really confused. If you don't know about flat as geometry, when you hear the music one, you'll be confused. Well, the word love, the word attachment, very common words. But let's look at Buddha's definition, because here we're using Buddha's approach. We're talking Buddhism here. So as far as the Buddha's concerned, in this consciousness of ours, in this mind of ours, which he would say is not physical, doesn't come from mummy daddy, doesn't come from a creator, we'll go into this, we can divide up the contents of it into two main ways of talking about how our mind works, We've got sensory consciousness, or mind. These words are used virtually synonymously in Buddhism. Consciousness, mind, okay? Not referring to the brain. Referring to your thoughts, feelings, emotions, unconscious, the capacity of your senses to cognize shape and colour. This is all of our mind. And so we have the sensory, that part of our mind that functions through the eyeball, the ears, the skin, etc., etc. Then we have the mental consciousness. And that is, as Lama Zopa puts it, that's where the workshop is. That's where what we really need to learn to know. And this is really where Buddha's expertise is, you know. It's not joking to say that Buddha is a psychologist. He's dealing with the mind and how it functions. And so to be a Buddhist, even begin to apply some of the tools in our life, we need to know what he means by our mind. So okay, if we look into our mental consciousness, which is where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says, so we can, as Lama Yeshe puts it, so we can be our own therapist, which is what really being a Buddhist is, dealing with your mind, changing your mind. This is Buddha's deal, this is his fundamental point, that we can change these minds of ours. We need to then understand the contents of this mind. And Buddhist psychology is deceptively simple, actually. You know, we've got really complex systems in the material, in our materialist views of the mind, you know. But the Buddhist view is quite simple. It hasn't changed in 2,500 years. 2,500 years. So it's either they're stubborn or it works. We have to look into that, you know. So the mental consciousness, you can say, is divided in the contents of our mind or mental consciousness. We can say very simply there are 3 categories of states of mind. And the crucial ones I want to discuss are those that the Buddha would simply refer to as negative and positive, or virtuous and non-virtuous, broadly speaking, which seem a bit moralistic to us, but they've got really, this is fundamental to understanding the way Buddha talks, you know. So the so-called negative states of mind, as far as Buddha is concerned, they are the ones that cause us suffering. And we all know the words. We all know the words. As soon as you hear the word angry, jealous, depressed, low self-esteem, arrogant, you know immediately that they're not the comfortable ones. They're kind of the uncool ones, you know. Especially if we're on the receiving end. We might want to admit that they're our problem, but if we're on the receiving end of somebody with those, we know they're the unhappy ones. Well, Buddha, you know, he uses the word negative, not in any kind of moralistic way, but referring to these states of mind that he would say are the source of suffering and indeed are the cause of why we're miserable and therefore why we harm others. Then you've got the other ones that virtually are the opposite, and we can call those simply positive states of mind. And we all know those. Love, compassion, generosity, forgiveness, patience. These words, all of these words are deceptively simple. We use these in a very easygoing way, you know. And like I said before, if we look into the words called love and attachment, we're going to each of us will define those in a very different way. So let's look at what Buddha means. So these 2 main categories, you know, positive, negative, okay? There's a third category, which are lots and lots and lots of our states of mind that don't have these characteristics which we're going to describe, which are very specific to Buddhist psychology, don't have any of the characteristics of being so-called negative and positive. And you'll see what I'm saying when we get into it. So an example of one of these third category, and then they're called neither negative nor positive. It seems a bit abstract. But they are ones, we have lots of these, and they're vital states of mind that enable us to function properly as human beings. So for example, something like concentration, something like mindfulness, which we make almost holy, but as Lama Zopa likes to point out, excuse me, thieves need mindfulness, you know, and really a very practical word that we could say is the meaning of mindfulness, which is one of these, it's neither negative nor positive, but is a crucial state of mind. Lama Yeshe refers to it as short-term memory. It's the ability to know from moment to moment what you're doing so you don't lose the plot, you know. Well, thieves need that as much as the person who's trying to meditate, right? So in its nature, though, it's got neither the characteristic of being so-called negative and positive, which we're going to go into. But they are vital states of mind, but they're not our business here, just at this moment. So the ones that are called negative and positive are really powerful for the Buddha because the negative ones are the source of our pain and the positive ones are the cause of our happiness. We all want to be happy. We all don't want to suffer. Okay, Buddha says, here are my methods. Work on your mind. It's hardly complicated, but the most difficult job we'll ever do because we don't think it's our mind that's the problem, do we? We think it's everybody out there, you know? So this is why it's in one sense really simple, but in another sense extremely difficult. Okay, so we have this state of mind called love. Well, that's under the heading called positive. And then we have another state of mind called attachment, and that's, for the Buddha, that's under the heading called negative. So this already is confusing to us because many of us in this room would use attachment to refer to something useful and good, like I have attachment to my children. And then to suddenly hear, what's that squeak?
Yeah.
What is it? It's not me, is it making noises? There's a squeaky sound. Huh?
Might be a table.
It's my table.
Oh, there you go. Okay, you're writing notes there. Good. Well done, never mind. It's good. We'll change it for somebody who's not writing notes, look. Let him have the squeaky voice.
No,
Does yours
I
squeak
think
too?
it's set now.
But does yours squeak?
No.
There you go,
it's
change
not-
tables.
No, it's not squeaking now. I
Oh.
think it was just
Didn't have
not.
the lock on it, I don't
Yes.
think.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think
All
that's
right,
what
honey.
happened.
Good. Okay, so attachment for the Buddha is actually, you know, this we can, as Lama Yeshe says, we can talk about this for a whole year. And we will never begin, he says, we'll never begin to really understand what it is until we look deeply inside, which of course is what being your own therapist means, which is what being a Buddhist really is, which is why we have to have these meditation tools, to look inside our own mind, you know. It sounds easy, these words are so simple, but it's not joking to say it's one of the most difficult jobs to do, because everything in us wants to look outside for the blame, for our happiness and our suffering. The Buddha said we've got to reverse that process and start looking inside here. The words are easy, but oh my goodness, to do it properly is not an easy job. So okay, so why would we need to look inside? Well, for the Buddha, these so-called negative states, these, as I said, they are the source of the suffering of sentient beings. And if you look into the Four Noble Truths, where Buddha lays out very nicely his explanation of what suffering is, and crucially, how we can get rid of it, because that's what he found from all his years of hard inner work. He came to these very solid conclusions from his own direct observation that suffering is that we can rid our beings of suffering. This is really what he's saying in the Third Noble Truth, that cessation of suffering is possible, you know. So in the First Noble Truth he describes what suffering is very clearly, and in the Second Noble Truth he describes what are the main causes. And so, as far as he's concerned, the main cause, there are two main ones, and they both subsume down to this one. That is the negative states of mind. This is really the basis of all Buddhist practice. Because he says we can rid the mind of these neuroses. And this is already a pretty interesting point, you know. In our ordinary materialist views of the mind and the ways we tend to take for granted, when we say words like anger, jealousy, depression, we all know them really well. I think there's an assumption deep in our being, and this is the assumption, I think, of all the models of mind in our culture, that these are normal human characteristics. Meaning, we give equal status, to, say, anger, love, generosity, depression, kindness, the so-called negative and so-called positive, using Buddha's view. We give equal status to all of these, sort of meaning that it's natural to have them. Meaning, you'd be unnatural if you didn't have anger. You'd be unnatural if you didn't have attachment. You'd be unnatural if you didn't have jealousy, or for that matter, love or kindness. But the Buddha's got this really simple but profound, outrageous, radical point, that the negative ones, like I'm saying, attachment, anger, pride, those ones, which we're going to describe, they, he says, are not at the core of our being. He would not give equal status to these. He says they're massively different states of mind, that the negative ones are the cause of our suffering, and this is the basis of his assertion that we can achieve cessation of suffering. And that's the meaning of the word nirvana, basically. Not someplace like heaven, a state of being. So what Buddhism is laying out of his methodology, and this is all psychology, it's what Buddhist psychology is exactly explaining what the negative states are, how they cause suffering, what their characteristics are, and of course, crucially, how we rid the mind of them. That's really what being a Buddhist is, you know. Sounds simple, these words, but the implication of this is pretty outrageous. So if it's true that there's a distinct difference between so-called negative and so-called positive, then we really need to know, not just intellectually, but we need to have the methods to identify them internally. And that's why we need this basic meditation technique called concentration meditation, known more colloquially in the West now as mindfulness meditation, you know, which is more and more common among Western psychologists, which is marvelous, you know. And this is actually not even a Buddhist technique, it's come from the Hindus. Buddha took it from the Hindus, you know, and kind of moved with it. Ran with this particular technique as this central technique that enables us to really be our own therapist at the level that Buddha says we're capable of, which is a really subtle level. And why do we need to do this? So we can unravel this insane asylum of our own mind, begin to distinguish, crucially, the difference between the negative and positive ones, so that we can unpack and unravel and change fundamentally and eventually rid from our minds totally the negative ones. That's the point that Buddha's making. They say in Buddhist psychology that these negative states of mind as they call it, are adventitious. Well, you need a dictionary for that. It's not a word you use in your daily life. It means that these states of mind, which we think are totally at the core of our being, which we absolutely give equal status to with the positive ones, which we assume you'd be weird if you didn't have, but the Buddha says we do not need them, they're the source of our pain, and we must identify them, and eventually we must rid our minds of them. That's eventually when we achieve this nirvana, This is what the Buddhism is all about. So we better know the difference. So the two main characteristics of all the neuroses, and attachment effectively is the main one. As far as the Four Noble Truths are concerned, as I was beginning to say, we look at the second Noble Truth, the causes of suffering. Fundamentally, the day-to-day main source of sentient being suffering is this cute word, attachment. So if it's true what Buddha says, and we're attempting to apply his methods to our lives, we absolutely must be certain, first intellectually, what is attachment, and not confuse it with the good qualities, so that we can rid the mind of it. And this is the tricky part. This is the part that is extremely difficult. So this is where this business of can you love without attachment comes in, Okay, so the characteristics of the negative ones, all the negative ones, attachment, anger, all the rest, the two key characteristics are that they're disturbing. And one of the many terms in Buddhist psychology for these negative states of mind is disturbing emotion. Well, check the last time you were jealous, You don't rejoice. Wow, it was great. I was jealous yesterday. No way in the whole world you can say this. Anger, we might defend our right to be angry, but excuse me, we know it's deep mental suffering. You're tortured by it. Jealousy, low self-esteem, depression, look at them. And they all have equal status for the Buddha. The negative ones, they're all equal to each other insofar as they're all disturbing. We don't get very moralistic about depression. We tend to call that a sort of a serious mental illness, but we don't seem to call anger a mental illness, That's just being naughty. But actually for the Buddha they're the same. In fact, depression, and we'll go into this perhaps, depression is just internalized anger. That's all. Kind of curious. But there's a way of describing this according to the Buddhist approach to the mind. So the first characteristic these unhappy states of mind have, whether it's depression or anger or arrogance, they're deeply disturbing. Check how you feel, disturbed. Look at us, This is such a typical thing. And the other one, which is really interesting, which really gets into the heart of the way the mind works for the Buddha, is that they're delusional. So I have to go to different countries, and I see that in most languages there's not a really good translation of this word. And this word in English is a perfect word. It describes exactly what Buddha's view is about why we suffer. Which is that these unhappy emotions, these unhappy, disturbing emotions, these neuroses, these afflictive emotions, you'll see many terms used in the Buddhist literature, these negative states of mind, these non-virtuous states of mind, we can generally use these to be synonymous. They are delusional, and it's a great word. If you're accused of being delusional, you're really offended, because you know what it means is you're not in touch with reality. And this, I tell you, is precisely, it's like bullseye for the Buddha. This is what he's exactly saying. And this is odd, because we wouldn't think that our unhappy emotions cause us to be delusional. It sounds most peculiar, But when we listen to it and look into it, and unless we look into love and say attachment, these two that we completely mix together, that we even use synonymously, but which are utterly different. And one of which is called virtuous or positive, love, and one of which is called totally negative and neurotic, which is called attachment. They've got very different characteristics. And of course, if we're trying to be our own therapist, if we're trying to do what Buddha says, which is change our minds, we're trying to grow love and lessen attachment. That's the whole point. Why? Because love is the source of happiness, for example, one of the many virtuous ones, and attachment is the source of suffering. So let's look at what he means by this, Well, and let's look at, therefore, in particular, look at how they are delusional, because this is the key, the negative ones. The negative ones are delusional. In other words, a way of putting it is, the extent to which we're caught up in, let's say, attachment, not to mention anger, jealousy and the rest, is the extent to which we're not in sync with reality. This is really precisely how Buddha's talking. And this helps us, leads us to eventually understand emptiness, which we're going to talk about later in the week or next week or whatever. Because that's when we really understand about how we're not in sync with reality. But all of the negative states of mind, as far as Buddha is concerned, these day-to-day ones as well, have the same characteristic. They cause us to be out of touch with reality. And that's why we suffer, he says. It's a very curious thing, because who would have thought, if you say you've got so much attachment to chocolate cake, you're not seeing the cake as it exists. Because that's what Buddha's saying. So let's see quite literally how it's true. It's not too complicated. So in general, the Buddha's saying that all the positive states of mind, the negative ones, like I'm saying, cause us, or have a particular characteristic, which is what causes us not to see things clearly. They exaggerate certain aspects of whatever object it is they're glommed onto. So if you have attachment for something, whether it's Fred or the chocolate cake, you know, or your own body or whatever you are attached to, attachment, we're going to go into this, then what happens is the thing you're attached to will look much more delicious than it really is. In other words, it exaggerates. Now, look when you're angry. And this is what's interesting. This is an interesting thing in Buddhist psychology, a really intimate relationship between attachment and anger. And we'll describe. As one Lama put it, anger is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So when anger is prevalent in the mind, then the object, the anger exaggerates the ugly aspects of the object. So look at ordinary old chocolate cake. We know perfectly well if you're hungry for chocolate cake and you're needy for chocolate cake, you think about chocolate cake when it's not there, manipulate to get chocolate cake, and when you see the chocolate cake, what the attachment in the mind is doing is making the chocolate cake look extremely delicious and desirable. We all know that. Look when you're in love with Fred. It's the prevalent emotion. Completely berserk. He looks like, God incarnate from the tip of his head to his toenails. We know that. And of course that's what's it seems so marvellous when you're in love with somebody. It feels such a marvellous state of mind. But when Fred gives you up for that younger version, you fall into despair, which we all recognise. Now look at how Fred appears to you. Eventually you learn to hate Fred. And how does he look? He doesn't look handsome anymore, does he? He looks revolting to you. Or look at the chocolate cake after the fourth piece. In no way it looks desirable any longer. And this is because attachment has now turned into aversion. And basically the state of mind called aversion is the basis of what we might call anger. You don't say you get angry with chocolate cake, but you have aversion for chocolate cake. You have aversion for a friend whom you now are angry with. Or you have aversion for yourself. That's depression. You appear like the worst person to yourself, don't you? Because the anger in your mind, which has gone inside, you're the object of it, it turns you into the most ugly person. We know this one. We know we love to hate ourselves. So this is the key characteristic of all the neuroses across the board. They exaggerate certain characteristics. So attachment exaggerates the deliciousness of something, making it look extremely desirable. And that's where we get very confused when we mix it with love. So love is, on the other hand, under the heading called positive. It's an altruistic state of mind. It's an excellent state of mind. We want to grow this to the nth degree, which of course is what Buddha says we can do. This state of mind is at the core of our being. This is one that's necessarily not delusional. It's to some extent is until we realize emptiness. But generally speaking, it's not delusional insofar as when you have love for somebody, you're seeing them more accurately. And in particular, there's a sense of connectedness, isn't there? When you've got the delusions, because they're neurotic, because they're the voices of ego, if you like, there's a real sense of separateness from others. There's this poor little lonely, bereft, little unhappy, miserable me, isn't there, that's hungry for the cake or hungry for Fred or wanting something out there. That's very much the function of attachment. So one of the characteristics of these unhappy states of mind, which exaggerate, is that when they're prevalent in your mind, there's a sense of being like a lonely, separate little poor self-pity me, as Lama Yeshe likes to call ego, the self-pity me. Whereas when the virtues, or the positive states of mind, in particular love, and of course indeed compassion, These are like the essence of all the virtuous qualities. When they are prevalent in our mind, we're more peaceful, and there's a sense of connectedness with others. Our mind kind of expands to encompass others. And that, for the Buddha, is how reality is. Reality is that everything is interdependent. So you could say, loosely speaking, roughly, when the virtues are prevalent in our mind, we are more in touch with reality, because reality is that things are interdependent, and there is a sense of interdependence when the virtues are prevalent. When the non-virtues or the neuroses are prevalent, there's just this sense of misery and separateness and panic and all the rest, you know. So love is an altruistic state of mind, and it's defined in Buddhism. We can give it one sentence definition. It begins with the bare bones thought, may you be happy. So you'd say the definition of love is the wish that others be happy. So of course they can have enormously strong degrees of this and maybe small degrees of it, and we have to grow it, and that's what we do in the compassion wing. All the Bodhisattva path is the development of these amazing positive qualities which Buddha says are at the core of our being and which we can develop to the nth degree, which is when we eventually enlightened. But we have to develop them, you know. And the other ones, we rid the mind of them. So love is altruistic, it's connected to others, it's the wish that others be happy. And then of course when you really act it out, it's your wanting to make them happy. And then doing what you can to make them happy. That's what love is. That's love. So that obviously we need that one, badly. So how come when we're having a so-called, as we call it, love relationship, how come it turns bad? What is the cause of that? So that often we even say, oh, well, when you're in love, then naturally you're going to have suffering. That's just the way, that's what happens. Well, rubbish for the Buddha. That's not true. This is not true. Love cannot possibly cause suffering. Remember the definition of love, not being in love, which is really attachment. The way we call love, when it's in love, it's 99% attachment. When the person looks divine, you believe they're the cause of all your happiness, you hanker after them, you get them, you lock them in, now I found happiness, we'll be together until we're 80, you know, as far as we're concerned. That's attachment. It's a complete fantasy, and it's hard to see it. But love is virtuous, love is realistic, love is connected to others, love is the wish that maybe they be happy, and love makes you happy and makes them happy. And that's what we're trying to grow. So attachment and love are actually completely different states of mind. Like when we say in England or Australia, they're like chalk and cheese. They look the same, but they're completely different. And this is what makes it so hard when you're in a relationship. Whether you're a parent or, you know, you've got your partner. It's extremely difficult to distinguish between these two. And that's the tricky job to do. This is a really hard job. In fact, to distinguish between all of the neuroses and all of the good qualities. You know, and that's the tough part. So the first thing, you know, we have to understand theoretically what these states of mind are. Because if we're going to start developing concentration meditation and start looking inside and being our own therapist, we have to learn to hear the difference between when attachment is talking and when love is talking. Because they're all chatting away in there, aren't they? We have to listen to, you know, have to hear the difference. And it's extremely hard on the face of it. Extremely hard on the face of it. I can say, I love you. You definitely want them to be happy. I definitely want you to be happy when I'm in love with you. No question. I will do anything to make you happy. But the reason, and as Lama Zopa puts it, the love we have now is unstable because it's based on attachment. So maybe we don't give up on our children. You know, no matter how bad they are to you, you don't give up on your kids. But, you know, we give up on partners pretty quickly, on workmates, friends from school, you know, old friends, whatever, we keep chucking them out because they turn from friends into enemies, isn't it? We stop loving them. We stop wanting them to be happy. Why? It's because attachment stopped. It's rare to have, you know, to continuing to love in your heart. It's rare to want the ex-hubby to be happy. I mean, when you really work at it, you can, but it doesn't come naturally. The instinctive one, when he starts, you know, gives you up for the younger version, as I said, and now his attachment has gone on to somebody else, it's like ripping your heart out. The pain is unbearable, isn't it? Well, that's the pain of attachment, not of love. Love doesn't cause suffering. Not possible. It's not possible for love to cause suffering. It's attachment that causes the suffering. And these words are so simple, but Buddha's view of them is really radically different from how we think, you know. This is why, if we really want to be, you know, if we choose to apply Buddhist techniques in our life, we absolutely can't just say, oh, I'm a Buddhist, What's it mean? Well, I don't know, you have faith in the Buddha, you know. It's not enough. You've got to, as His Holiness tells us, anytime he gets a chance, we've got to study the teachings. Because Buddhist psychology is very different, and in many ways radically different from the view we have in the materialist world. Well, of course it is. The first thing is we learn the mind is the brain. Buddha disagrees, you know. You ask some great meditator in Tibet who's been up in the mountains for years and years, being their own therapist, where their brain is. I'm sorry, they couldn't tell you. They've never heard of a brain. They've never heard of a brain. It doesn't exist in Tibetan psychology. It doesn't exist in Tibetan medicine, in their system. Sure, there's a brain, but they don't give it the same function that we do. It's such a different view, but they know their minds, believe me. So the materialist view is we assume our mind is the brain. We assume it comes from mummy and daddy. So, you know, when I go to my therapist and I tell you my problems, naturally where you lead me to find the source of my problems is into the past. You look into my body, my chemical makeup, my genetic makeup. You look at what people did to me. You look at my parents, because that's where we assume the source of my problems is, you know. But for the Buddha, you don't do that. You can, it's very helpful. But that's not where you have to look. He says the outside, the brain, the physical, the genes, the DNA, the mother, the father, the Catholic nuns, the ex-hubby, they all play a role in my life, but they're secondary. This is the way Buddha has of saying it, I'm saying. Or they're catalysts. They're not the main player, which is a big surprise to us because we think they are. For the Buddha, the main player is your own very mind, which is not your brain, but is your thoughts, your concepts, your viewpoints, your emotions. They are what we have to unpack and unravel and to change, because they are the source of my happiness and my suffering. This is the simple point, but hard to hear that Buddha's making, you know. So the place to look is into your own very thoughts, which seems so puzzling to us. We don't know how to do it. As Lama Yeshe says, most ordinary people on this earth don't even know their mind plays a role at all. We utterly assume it's all out there, isn't it? We assume it's out there. We know we're angry, but my anger, as far as I'm concerned, is a function of your action. You did it. You caused me to be angry. We don't even think of it as something internal. We think of it as a result of what you did to me. You know? So really, these words are easy enough to say, that the mind is inside, it's your thoughts and feelings and emotions, but to really start putting this into practice is not an easy job, you know. To develop, in other words, these introspective techniques, where we really learn to hear what is going on in between our own ears, basically. This is the job. This is the job of being a Buddhist. This is the real job of being a Buddhist, you know. That means we have to then distinguish, using Buddhist psychology, the difference, the distinguish between the so-called negative and so-called positive. Sounds simple, but oh my goodness, the hardest job we'll ever do, you know. So let's look a bit more deeply at this so-called attachment, this simple word we all, you know so well from Buddha's literature. Well, it's multifaceted, okay? The subtlest, most pervasive level of this, almost at an energetic level of this attachment. This actually, you know, we need to even get a sense, take on board this idea of the Buddhas, that our mind comes from before. We understand that in the West, but we think it comes from mummy and daddy. We track it back from grandpa and grandma. So we understand going back. But the Buddha says, sure, go back, but not to grandma and grandpa, to moments of your own mind, which he says is not physical, and it's like a river of mental moments, which he said you can track back before conception to a few weeks before that. And this continuity of consciousness known as my mind was in a previous body. This is what the Buddha says, you know. So we take that as our hypothesis here. And so Buddhists would say, because one of the deepest level, most pervasive level of this attachment, almost like I'm saying, at the energetic level, is the result of having had it in the past. We come into this life, from the first second of conception, fully programmed with the energy of attachment. And this is where it's the most curious. At this level, and we wake up in this life with it, and look at us, is this the energetic level of attachment, the deepest, most pervasive level, is this energy of dissatisfaction. A deep, deep, deep instinctive feeling of dissatisfaction. This drives us. And on the basis of this deep sense of being dissatisfied, meaning I am not enough, I don't have enough, no matter what I do or get, it is never enough. Look at us. This is the energy of past attachment that manifests as this terrible bottomless pit of dissatisfaction. So naturally, on the basis of this dissatisfaction, we hanker after something. Because if you're feeling dissatisfied, obviously you're missing something. So therefore, on the basis of having senses, and we are sensory beings, Buddha calls this that we live in this universe a desire realm, and desire is virtually synonymous with the word attachment. We're living in a realm of existence completely, created by attachment, Buddha says. So on the basis of this dissatisfaction, this is the next level of attachment. It's this hankering, this neediness, this craving. So the most obvious immediate level of craving is for the objects of the senses, isn't it? The most obvious level. For the objects of the senses, For the smells, the tastes, the touch, the sights, the sounds. And obviously we can see some of those objects, depending on who you are stronger for you than others. For some people it's food. For some people it's sex with bodies. For some people it might be music. For some people it might be, it doesn't have to be just the sense. It doesn't have to be the objects of the senses. This is the grossest level. Then, of course, is attachment to all other aspects of our life. And the deeper level of attachment, which we'll go to later, the deeper level, the hardest to see, is attachment to what people think of us. This is really hard to see. But let's look at the first level, the obvious level, which is the one of the senses. And this preoccupies most of the time. It preoccupies us. This book I'm working on at the moment of Lama Yeshe is about how to help people in the time of death. As Rinpoche points out there, our grossest attachment is to this body, which is this object of the senses, isn't it? And getting what this body wants, Most of our life is caught up in just that. The food, the comfort, the way it looks, the sounds, the smells, the tastes. We're utterly preoccupied. In fact, the materialist world defines a person only in terms of their body. We don't even posit something beyond that, Christians would call it a soul, or Buddha would refer to your mind as not physical. So the attachment to get what the body wants, this is massive every second. This attachment is like a motor that propels us, Then the next level of attachment, like I indicated before, it has this really tricky function of when it's prevalent in the mind, it exaggerates the deliciousness of that object that you hanker after. The more you have attachment for something, the more divine it looks. And the next level of attachment, the way it functions, is that it causes this you have to then manipulate to get it. In the 12 links of dependent arising, there's 2, 8th and 9th are called craving and then called grasping. They're just 2 levels of attachment. They're all variations of attachment. And so generally speaking in daily life, the craving is when the first moment of the thought arises to get the cake. And then the grasping is when you go get the cake. So it's like putting into practice the getting of what attachment wants. And so then there's the manipulating to get the object, and then the absolute assumption deep in the bones of our being that when I get it, I'll get satisfaction. And then the expectation, the massive expectation that when I put the cake in the mouth, or when I get Fred, I will get happiness. And then, of course, so all of that is a function of attachment. So it's not just this cute, oh yeah, I'm so attached to chocolate cake. It's multifaceted, and it literally drives us from second to second. For the Buddha, effectively, in the Second Noble Truth, he would say that attachment effectively, and Lama Yeshe points that out in this book, effectively it's the main cause of all suffering, moment by moment. Which sounds shocking, because who would have thought? Who would have thought? A simple word, attachment. It's so primordial, so spontaneous, so continuous, like a motor that propels us from second to second. In other words, another way of talking about it is that it's this frantic, based on this energy of dissatisfaction, this frantic drive every second to desperately, and it is desperate, it's completely desperate, to get what I want every microsecond. And this is what's interesting. I'm going off from love now. I'll get back to love in a minute, okay? But the relationship between this attachment and anger, which initially you would never think there'd be a relationship the way we understand these words in the West. You know? That anger is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. And attachment is like this motor that drives us every microsecond, and like I said, desperately, to get what I want every millisecond. And the millisecond it doesn't is the beginning, that moment, of anger. Look at all the polite words we use for it. Frustration, annoyance, irritation, upset. They're polite words for aversion. The name of the state of mind that anger is a strong expression of, as I said before, is this word aversion. So we've got attachment and aversion, and we're basically going between these 1,000,000 times a day. So to begin to observe these states of mind and to next 10, 20, 30 years and next life, this is the job, really, of being a Buddhist every day. You know? And working with these two, understanding ever more deeply, seeing them ever more deeply, harnessing them ever more deeply. This is really day-to-day, full-on, in-your-face, hard Buddhist practice. Let's go back to love and attachment now then. So anyway, before I go there, any questions about all this so far? Anything to say?
What about practical applications of anger?
Sorry, no, what?
Huh? You say that we need to untangle these things, but
Yes.
what's the tool? How do you untangle, like when people cut you off in traffic?
Well, that's, you know,
have that anger.
of course, that's what the practice is, you know. That's what the whole, so in order to see the anger in your mind when someone cuts you off, you have to, in order to fix it, you have to notice it, right? Who's talking to me? I can't see. Hang on. Okay. So let's put it another way. You may be asking, what do you do when someone cuts you off?
What view do you have?
Okay, so you're asking, what do you do when someone cuts you off? The implication being anger rises. Is that right? Anger rises in the mind?
Right.
Okay.
Disrespect.
All right. Okay, good. So listen. That's a bit like asking, what do I do when I'm about to crash on the freeway, travelling at 120, let's say 80 miles an hour? Would you agree that the answer totally depends on how well you can drive? Would you agree with that? Would you agree with that?
Yes.
It can't be just a blank statement. It has to be, well, I've got to ask you how well you drive. So here I have to say to you, how well have you worked on your mind? How deeply do you know anger? How much meditating have you done? How deeply do you know attachment? Because that has to be what qualifies the answer. If a person who's never looked at their mind, who's never thought before that their anger is the problem, then the answer would be, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing, because you're not even used to the thought yet. So if a person's been meditating for many years, then that would qualify the answer, wouldn't it? But already we can say, if, let's say, when the person cuts you off and out come the curse words, let's say, well, we can deduce that you haven't done much work on anger. So then the answer would be different for you then. If another person who's been working on their mind for years and years, and they don't have the swearing, and they're observing their mind, well, the answer will be again different for them, isn't it? So it's very much a question of where you're at, as to the answer you give.
Right.
But the long-term answer, which is the same as, the one about, if, say, you have only driven once before, and you're on the freeway going at 80 miles an hour, and you're about to crash, well, probably the best answer would be, what do I do? Damage control is about the best, because you don't have many tools in your toolkit, do you? You get my point here? It's the same. When you make me angry, as I put it, and I'm cursing and swearing, already it's too late in a way. Vesuvius has just exploded. You see my point? So the best I can do is have the crash, and if I survive it, sit back and go, okay, what can I learn from that? Back to basics, start to learn driving, baby. So then I've got a few tools up my sleeve when I'm about to crash, hopefully avoiding the crash, because I'm seeing it coming, So it's the same mentally. It's the same mentally. Go back to basics, learn some concentration, do some meditation every day, understand Buddhist psychology, identify what attachment is, identify what anger is, and hopefully deal with the anger when you drop something. Instead of swearing, learn to work with it. And slowly, as we progress, and maybe depending on how strong the anger is, I can see in my mind, it took me years, because anger was definitely one of my main habits. It took me years of all this stuff before I could even have confidence that I could catch it before it came out the mouth. Do you see? So a long way to go, depending on the person. But the key one for me, which I found amazing from the beginning, is that it's not at the core of my being, and that's what gave me confidence and perseverance to keep working at it. And yet for the 90,000th time, you find yourself, you're cursed again, you pick yourself up, you remember the learning, and you go back to basics. And slowly, slowly, some change begins to come. It's not magic, you know. That's a long answer, but you kind of get my point, don't you?
Yeah. I was looking for an easy button.
There isn't. There isn't. There just isn't one. You understand? You can see why, can't you? It's long, constant, pick yourself up, learn the skills, keep practicing, keep practicing, keep practicing. And then don't have expectations. One of the biggest problems for people who start, let's say, for example, get into Buddhism and hear about how you can change your mind and change your anger and change your jealousy, we get all excited. And then you discover, you discover after 1 year, 2 years, it almost feels like you're getting worse, and you want to kill yourself. But as Lama's, I'll tell you a story. One of my friends, Roger, an Australian monk, who's like a serious professional meditator, off for many years, 3-year, 4-year retreats. I mean, a full-on serious Buddhist practitioner. Okay. But at one point, he said his anger and rage were out of control, and he was like freaked out about it. He'd been meditating for years, okay? You'd sort of had this vague expectation that after years of meditating, and I mean 3 or 4 year retreats, somehow some change might have happened. And he was really freaked out, and he went to Lama Zopa, and Rinpoche laughed and laughed and said, fantastic, the dirt has to come out. The dirt has to come out. So what I'm really seriously saying here, the way Buddha talks, I mean, not just one life and we learn this stuff. I take this as just our hypothesis here. We come programmed with this junk from eons of time that talk about unconscious. It's like a joke. So it's really deeply, deeply, deeply ingrained, far more than we would imagine. So this kind of gives you a little bit of humility and patience, and we realize that it's not just a quick fix that we're talking about. We're talking about really delving in long term. And so one of the signs of progress is that almost you can say you're getting worse. But you're not getting worse. You're not getting worse. You're just digging it up real deep. And this is Roger's experience. So we've got to have a very different approach to it, and a lot of courage, actually. And not just this naive expectation, oh, I should be better by now. Because we'll get very depressed if we think that. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because this stuff goes very deep, you know. This is, I mean, my own experience is that. Yeah. Someone else? Yes.
I just wanted to say that I've experienced over the last couple of years, sometimes I'll go through a period where I'm...
we don't have a microphone, do we? We have a microphone for people?
It's built
It's
in.
The questions.
It's built in.
Oh, it is? Oh, of course, you guys are the best in the world. That's right, you've got this wonderful built-in business. Go on then,
And I
yeah.
just wanted to say that I've gone through periods of times where I've practiced intensely and I've gotten worse.
That's
I
right.
feel crazy, and
That's
I've gone through like all these crazy emotions
That's
that come
right.
up even recently, and like,
Yes.
what's wrong?
That's
And so, I guess I just have to work harder.
Yeah, I think we're going to be very, it's going to be skillful. You know, a good analogy for me, like you hear about, when you go to the gym, you can get really fit and healthy. Well, depending on how unfit and unhealthy you are, is how long it will take, isn't it? So we have this naive expectation that I go to the gym and what happens the first night? You come home and you've discovered muscles you never knew you had. And so it's almost like a joke to say you're getting better. We all know with the body, it really has to get worse before it gets better. We know that. Look at your garden. It might look quite a pleasant, just piece of barren ground. But, it's full of ugly weeds under there. You're going to have to drag it all up and make it look like a disgusting mess before you start growing new seeds in it. So we all know, when you go on a fast, or you go on a diet, you're feeling a lot worse. So we understand that when it comes to the body, but we really freak out when it comes to our emotions. But so therefore, we've got to know. So for example, if you sat back watching television, and you had pain like you have if you go to the gym, well then you've got a problem. You have got a problem. But if the pain is coming home from the gym, it's obviously good pain, and you can interpret the difference. Well, the same with your mind. We've got to not just kid ourselves. We've got to really know what we're doing here, be very precise in our techniques, understand the process of purification, as they call it, know the techniques well, be confident you're doing the right thing. And then you can have some more courage with living with this rubbish until it goes away, And that's part of our problem, because we have this terrible expectation it should all go away quickly. But the more effort we make, the more you're dredging it up, actually. So we've got to really be brave, I swear to you, because we desperately want it to go away. That's the irony. Attachment, wants it to all be nice. Attachment's a junkie that wants nice things only. So when we look into our own minds and we feel our own minds getting miserable, the attachment in us desperately can't stand it. Because attachment's a junkie, it only wants nice things. So we've got to be courageous. And the way I like to put it is, all these crazy roommates we have, all these 97 different voices of attachment and anger and jealousy and low self-esteem, and they're all running around berserk, running the house here, meaning me. I've got to learn to listen to all these crazy people in my own head and learn to live with them. Not wish that they'll all go away, because they will go away eventually, but not overnight, believe me. Do you understand? So anyway, yeah, good sign. Someone else? Yes.
Is there a concept of productive anger in Buddhist psychology?
Give me an example.
From a Western perspective, as a psychologist, sometimes people who are being abused by other people need to learn how to speak up. So out of protection, is there a way that our anger can drive us into loving action?
So you're talking about a person who's being abused. Anger in that person's mind. I understand. Anger, okay, let's again look at Buddha's definitions. Necessarily, just first of all, necessarily attachment, anger, jealousy, all the neuroses are delusional, they're voices of ego, and they can only cause suffering. In general, that's the statement he makes. Okay, so then maybe we have to use a different word. So if a person has been a total victim and that's the thing, we have to look into why a person's a victim in a relationship. This sounds very cruel because it sounds like you're blaming the victim, but it's not. It's looking at the mind of a person. So a victim, and this is really not blaming the victim, we've got to look into the mind, okay? It doesn't mean that, there can be a brutal person abusing another person terribly, but the mind of a victim is a mind of enormous fear, and that's a function of ego grasping. A function of ego. Then huge attachment to be needed and loved. So terror of upsetting somebody, and that's often the victim kind of. You know yourself when you're in a relationship. If you're the passive or the victim in the relationship, it's almost like you're allowing the person to abuse you. Don't think it's blame. Don't hear it this way. But we've got to start looking into our own minds. We've got to start seeing this. But maybe that person first has to have the courage to recognise that this other person has been abusing them, and that's not appropriate. And eventually so you could say in the beginning, they've got to have enough courage to actually say, it is wrong that you hit me. And most people who are real victims cannot possibly say that because they're so terrified, and their attachment to being loved is so huge and needed that they don't want to upset the apple cart. So they sit there seemingly putting up with it. But actually it's totally unhealthy. It's actually, the irony is, it's another way that ego manifests. That's ego too. In fear and panic and all those things, right? So that person must have the courage to stand up and recognise the simple fact that a person abusing you is not appropriate. Of course. So you could say that's getting angry first. You could say that. And then eventually, when the person's brave enough and they push that person away and said, bye-bye baby, I'm leaving, then they can start their own process of seeing their own mind. Do you understand? So when it comes to the outside world, I remember one time, very nicely, Martin Luther King said, it's okay to be angry, but maybe meaning, using the words here, it's okay to find fault. There is war, there is sexism, there is racism. So then the difference between, and the same with the business, the same with the one of being abused. You don't have to be angry at the person, but you see this is wrong. That's not anger necessarily. That's being reasonable. That is wrong to have a war. Then, as Martin Luther King said, this is my point. Normally, anger or guilt or fear are just impotent. They rant and rave, We turn it against ourselves, we hate ourselves, or we turn it against the world. How dare there be racism? Shout, yell, kick, scream. What good is that? But as Martin Luther King said, it is good you see fault, but then, this is the point now, then you say, what can I do about it? And that's when it turns into compassion. And the same with here. Not just, people often end up being the ones who turn against the brutalizer and stab them 27 times. Because the anger is in there, but been repressed. And they don't even see their own anger. So it's very, that's all very terrifying. And that's the victim mind. It's terrifying to see it, So there's lots of stuff in there. But the bare bones understanding of the states of mind as far as Buddha is concerned is that all the ego voices are not healthy. So the victim mind, the repressed one, the guilty one, the fearful one, that's all another aspect of ego. Do you understand my point? When we know that without guilt and blame, then we can really start to work on it ourselves. But we've got to do one step at a time. So if you're as a therapist, a person comes along who's a total victim, you don't give them a lecture and say you're allowing the bully to bully you. It's true, technically. Because the minute that person, the victim, changes, then it's, the whole dynamic has changed. But it's very hard to see that when you're a victim. Because you're so convinced of this monster out there who's the blame, who's the cause of all the problem. So it's really quite hard to see it. Do you understand? Do you see what I'm saying, people? When you change the dynamic, I mean, I remember even just some stories. A friend of mine was in the bath. She's a girl, a woman, and she was in the bath, naked, naturally, because she's in the bath, for God's sake. She wasn't, it shouldn't have done. So she heard the door open, and she thought it was her friend, whom she lived with, and she went out naked. And she thought it was this fellow who'd broken in. And she suddenly got mad at him and started screaming at him. Well, he ran, he couldn't get the quick enough out. This mad, naked lady chasing him. So suddenly she became the aggressor. So he ran off with his tail between his legs. Do you see what I'm saying here? It was very spontaneous how it happened. So where was the victim there? She wasn't a victim, she became the aggressor. And he ran off, right there. It's easy to say that, but when we have so much fear, we're paralyzed, And this is all the interesting point about when you've got rid of ego, the way Buddha talks, when you finally rid the mind of all the neuroses, which is how he says we can, as Lama Zopa puts it, there is no fear. There'd be no such thing as a victim. And that's very shocking to hear that, because we can't hear it, it's hard to hear it. So if a victim comes to you, yeah, love them. And get them to see how dare this person harm you. That will wake up their fear a bit. Instead of being pussyfooting and being all gentle with them, get them to, yes, really recognise how dare this person harm you. That's absolutely right. Cause them to have the courage to recognise the fact that that's called abuse. Call it anger if you like. But it's the courage to say that, and the victim mind can't bear to do that. Do you understand? Does it make sense, people? It's really tricky. It's very hard. Because we fall very easy into the trap of victims and oppressors. We love to hate the oppressor and love the victim. Or at some point, this is the Buddha's view, we all have to work on our own mind. You understand? That's very scary. Take responsibility, It's very hard. What else, people? Yeah.
Well, I think instead of anger, that's really wisdom.
Yes, it is, exactly. That's
really
right.
wisdom.
It is.
Really
Seeing there's racism,
yeah.
That's wisdom, precisely. It's
Yeah.
wisdom. And then what can I do about it, which is the courageous, rather than the victim.
Yeah.
How dare there be racism, shout, yell, scream,
Right.
Of course there's racism. The world's full of shocking things. That was amazing the way he said that. It's all right to find fault, but then say,
Right.
what can I do? And that's the same in your own life. You've got to see the fault. Hey, my hubby's been beating me up for 20 years. Hey, that's wrong. You've got to say that. You must say that. Now, what can I do about it? That's right, it's wisdom, precisely.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then,
Yeah.
well, the other piece I wanted to
Yeah.
mention was when you were talking about the courage
Yes.
to really work with
Yes.
what you find.
That's right.
I think that's the other opportunity to find the compassion of the human state. When we get exhausted, we look and we find the courage of those dark places that
In our
us
own
up
mind.
and down, and
Yes.
you can work really hard
Yes.
and kind of get exhausted sometimes.
Yes, that's right.
But in that moment of just relaxing a little bit and feeling and leaning in with compassion, for yourself, of just the human.
No,
state,
exactly. That's
like
right.
that.
All that, and that's that's right. Exactly.
Instead
No,
of
it's
kind
right.
of over efforting all
Yep.
the time.
No, I hear
Like
you.
that.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes, I was just thinking that it is not good for the perpetrator
Yes.
that there be a victim
That's
that
right.
takes.
Exactly.
So out of compassion and
Yes.
wisdom
Yes.
for the other guy.
That's right. That's right. Well, that's
That's
very
what it's
advanced, though, isn't it? It's
Well,
true.
well-
The first one is to see it for oneself, and then
Absolutely.
the compassion for the other comes.
Right.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right.
Right.
Absolutely right. Yeah. Exactly. That's really advanced, though. But yes, exactly. Well, the way they say it in Buddhism is, as Holiness the Dalai Lama said, how they've got this nice analogy. I love this. He didn't say this, but I'm quoting. They have it a lot. A bird needs two wings: wisdom and compassion. And the wisdom we're talking here is all the nuts and bolts of looking into yourself. Then on the basis of that, you can have compassion for others because the basis is the same. And as Oliver often says, compassion's not enough. You've got to have wisdom, which is really like compassion for yourself. You've got to see the fault here, look at yourself. Then you can afford to see other people. And that's why in the beginning, don't have compassion for the abuser yet. You've got to work out your own self first. Compassion comes, you know. Yeah. Yes.
You talked about deep dissatisfaction.
Which is the energy of attachment, yeah. It's our biggest disease.
Where does that come
From? I know it's a disappointing answer, but why are you good at piano today? What's the simplest reason?
Practice.
And why were you good yesterday? Because you practiced yesterday. And why were you good the day before? And why were you good the day before? And why were you good the day before? So whatever you've practiced is why you're good at it. Well then, dissatisfaction comes from practicing attachment.
Well, where's the seed of it?
Oh, you want the first moment.
Yeah.
Okay, we all want the first moment. We all want the first moment, but Buddha thinks it's a very silly idea. There's no such thing as a first moment. There can't be. This is a bit scary. You see, if we want a first moment, that's either the Big Bang or that's God. There's two options. And Buddha says both are irrational. He's not being rude or anything. He says it's just a process of cause and effect. So the chicken and the egg, it's like the chicken and the egg. What's the first, why does this attachment come from? Previous moment. And where did that come from? Previous moment. Get back to the first second of conception. So where did that moment of attachment come from? Where would it come from?
Previous
Of that attachment, in that mind. And where did that moment come from? Say the answer.
Previous moment.
Of that attachment in that mind. And where did that moment come from?
Previous moment.
And go back 1 trillion years, and where did that moment of attachment come from? Now, you've got to keep saying it and something will drop. Of, in that mind, in that river of mental moments. And where did it go back another 1 trillion years before this universe? Where did that attachment come from? In that continuity of mind. And where did that one come from? Okay, so do you feel you can get to one where it says there's the first one? And if you did, you'd have to ask where did it come from? And you can't have, in other words, you cannot have an absolute Big Bang. As His Holiness says, Big Bang, no problem, just on the first Big Bang, that's all. And this is Buddha's view, that consciousness, and in fact matter, there's only two, really you could say as far as the Buddhist view of the universe is concerned, there's matter, which is made of the 4 elements. Just like Galileo and our mob back in the Middle Ages said, we say our mob in Australia. Okay? The 4 elements is the physical universe. Well, they're beginningless for the Buddha. But we want a creator. We want a first moment. It's an irrational thing, he says. It's not reasonable. Because everything is a product of cause and effect. And you can't have a first cause. You can't have a first chicken. You just can't have. As mad as it sounds. We have to think about that, okay? We have to think about it, obviously. So can we love without attachment? Well, yeah, the bodhisattvas who've given up attachment, they can love very nicely. So virtually most of us know, I mean, to even get rid of attachment the way Buddha says we can, which of course he says we can, which is what nirvana is, it's really until you're the most highly evolved being. You're going to have attachment, but obviously less and less. So the more you grow love, that weakens your attachment. There's different approaches to getting rid of attachment. One approach to getting rid of attachment is just say no to the chocolate cake. You know, like giving up alcohol. Then you begin the real work of giving up the attachment to alcohol. And the other way, in looking in relationships, the way to weaken attachment, which is getting what I want here. It's like a frantic junkie to get what I want every second. Then the way to tamper that down is to give what the other wants, isn't it? Which is love. You see what I'm saying? So it depends on the person. So sometimes you got to harness your own need to have what you want. The other time you've got to purposely give the other person what they want, and that's the practice of love. You get what I'm saying here? And it depends on the situation, you know. Because attachment is this junkie, basically, this junkie mind that's at the most deep level, this just yearning, frantic, desperate craving to get what I want every microsecond. And don't think you're being mean, just look at it, have compassion for yourself. Because look at the response, remember, when it doesn't get what it wants. And that can be the smallest tiny thing. You drop something and you get upset. Because attachment didn't get what it wanted. The red light, the loud noise. The smallest thing can trigger thwarted attachment. Are you hearing me? And the millisecond it doesn't get what it wants, that's the beginning of aversion. If it goes in, it becomes guilt and depression. If it goes out, it becomes rage and anger, you know. So working on this is so hard. So one approach is you work on it every day. You learn to harness it. The other one, in relationships, the most powerful way to work on it, we all know, is to give the other what they want. But then this is the trouble. If you're this victim, you look like you're a really nice person, but it's very tricky. Whereas you're just fearfully doing what the other person wants. And this brings us, and this is why it's really hard to hear this, and this is something we all understand, listen to it, this subtler level of attachment, the more primordial level. I swear to you, this seems to be almost more than attachment to sex or power or drugs or anything. This is this deep, instinctive, yearning attachment to what other people think of me. Can you hear it? It runs us, I tell you. So primordial, so hard. And that's the one of the victim is that gone mad. Terrified of what the other person thinks. Terrified of upsetting. You know, we say, oh, I don't want to upset the person. I don't want to upset them. I don't want to make them unhappy. I don't want to hurt them. We say like that. It's 99% of the time it's fear of what they think. Fear of them not liking me. Fear of that, and that's really so deep inside us, you know. Are we recognizing what I'm saying? Can you hear it? This is very hard to see. And very scary to know when to actually give in to the other person as an antidote to your attachment, or when to stand up. And that's what's so hard. And that's, again, wisdom. Very hard, this one, you know. That's why in the stages of development of practice, the so-called Lam Rim, the very first stages, the junior school level, it's all about just controlling attachment of the sense objects, which is pretty obvious, but at a pretty gross level, but pretty powerful already. Control your body and control your speech, you know. I mean, if we could just do this much, we'd be a blissful person. Just control our body and speech. Then as we get more progress along and become our own therapists in high school, and then we get to university where we do the compassion wing, and we then start to look at, as they call it in the Tibetan literature, you see this term they use, the 8 worldly dharmas, this strange abstract term. It's just for subtler levels of attachment. Attachment especially to what they call it attachment to reputation, but it's attachment to what other people think. And because we are so frantic to have other people think I'm a nice person, and you ask the question, why would I want that? It's obvious, because you don't think you are. It's so bizarre. In fact, we don't think we exist until someone else says, hello, Robina, you're a nice person. You understand what I'm saying? We don't have any. So the irony of ego is we hate ourselves. And this is the dissatisfaction so deep. We don't think we're enough on our own. And so I've got to have another half. Not kidding, you know. What do you think? Listen to this, sounds very cruel actually, but you listen to this. What do you think loneliness is? You listen to what loneliness is. You don't have anyone to share your thoughts with. So if you understand it, just look at it technically. If we, Buddha would say, everything that we are is inside here. And everything in here can be fully developed to perfection. We have all the stuff in here. But we're so addicted to believing that what I am comes from out there. And from a person loving me, and a person giving me, and a person educating me. That's what makes me who I am. Of course, they're the tools we need to use. But we're so believing that happiness is out there. We're so believing that suffering is out there. But everything's in here. So who I am is already in here. And I can fully develop this to perfection, Buddha says. So if so the way we are now with this terrible dissatisfaction, which is attachment, the main one we're yearning for is because we don't feel I am anybody. In other words, we're terribly dissatisfied with who I am. So I've got to have you praise me. You tell me nice things. I've got to have a good reputation. You've got to say to me, you're a lovely person. But look how deep our attachment is. 27 people can tell me I'm a nice person. And I'm hungry like a vampire for it. But I won't believe a single word, do I? Nah, come on, I'm not really. Say it again, please.
Say it again, please.
You understand? I mean, we're so suffering. We should be crying right now for ourselves. And yet you look, one person criticizes this. Which one do we believe? Look at it. What do you think it says about us? And that's the terrible irony of this attachment. This neediness to be seen by others. Because we don't think we are anybody without others. So what else is loneliness? You can't value, if you can value yourself, it means you've developed, you've lessened attachment. Which means the consequence of lessening attachment is you become more content. You become more satisfied, more blissful, more joyful, more fulfilled. Literally. It's because of attachment that we're not fulfilled, that we're empty. Of course, the junkie view of attachment is it'll come from out there. Other people's words, other people's sights, food, out there. It's all out there. This is a schizophrenic way that ego works, you know. Are you hearing me, people?
Yeah.
So it's a really deep disease we're talking. Won't go overnight, believe me. So loving a person without attachment, sure, of course it's possible, but hey, don't hold your breath, all right? It's really advanced. It's like a bodhisattva, basically. You have true love, but what do? We are practicing, are we not? You can't be perfect, so we practice it. And that's why, you know, having relationships, I mean, I'm not trying to make you depressed or anything, but do you realise that 40% of all women murdered on Earth, who do you think murders them? Their partners. It's not a joke, you know. I remember reading in Vanity Fair, I read all these magazines, and in Vanity Fair they do these cute surveys, these funny surveys, you know, and one survey was, where are you most afraid? Well, everybody said it was in the bad neighbourhoods. Well, excuse me, where's the bad neighbourhood? 40% of it in your own home. I'm sort of not joking, but I am joking. Because we hear that and we go, oh yeah, that's not my home. I mean, look how easy it is to be to kill your partner when you're so completely full of grief and hurt and distress and depression and jealousy and pain. I mean, look at the pain we have in a relationship. Forget the war zone pain. And why do you think this is? Attachment, people. So it's a huge state of mind. Don't underestimate it. So of course it's possible to love without attachment, but that's the practice. Okay, so good luck. But you know, I don't have I always joke and I say if I had a husband and children, they'd be dead. Definitely. So just as well, I'd be one of, they'd be the ones, I'd be in the 40%, they'd be in the 40%. Definite. So just as well I chose this institution. Because we all got to know our own minds. But we can't escape, I've got to give up attachment too, you know. So then, that means you've got to, you know, love and attachment is amazing, a powerful one. Love is a delight in another person's happiness, wanting them to be happy. So as long as you're doing what I want, it's easy for me to want you to be happy, isn't it? You understand? That's why you look so blissful and divine for me in the beginning of the relationship, but everything's just perfect. It's easy to want you to be happy. Of course I love you. My heart is blissfully open to you. Because attachment is so fresh and perfect. The bubble hasn't burst yet, you know. And this is normal human, it's not being cynical. It's just human behaviour. So as the attachment kind of bubble bursts a bit, that's when the real work starts. And then if every day you practice lessening your own neediness, practice giving the other person, practice wisdom and courage to be clear and wise and say the right thing and not be a victim, then that's why your relationship will last, you know. Or be useful while it does last. You know, if there's any happiness in your relationship, it's because you've given up attachment and you're developing love. If there's suffering in your relationship, it's because you haven't given up attachment. It's very simple, very clear. To hear this is kind of stark, you know. Because of course the person's got problems. They have, but that's their problems. But look at ours, you know. And this is why it's so tough. Are we communicating?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Any more questions, maybe? 8:15. Any more questions? It's quite early.
All right, Robina, I have a question.
Hello, darling.
That's
Yes.
not me, though, so don't attack me, okay?
I can't guarantee I won't attack you.
You attacked me last year, but this isn't my question, so you can look at the camera.
I still can't guarantee I won't attack you.
My friend Simon is listening online. He had a question for you. He said, if so, can you ask this question for me? He said, does understanding dependent origination help you understand attachments?
Of course it does. It's the answer to all of it. When you understand dependent arising, you realise emptiness, and when you realise emptiness, you've given up. You eventually give up all the junk. Of course you do. That's the point. But the point is this, you know, understanding these delusions, here we're talking here, attachment, anger, and the rest, which are the ordinary, everyday ones, by understanding how they are delusional and causes suffering, this leads us to understand the deeper delusion, which is the one that's underneath even attachment, which is what is eradicated when we realise dependent arising and emptiness. So the deeper delusion, and I've implied it already, is this sense of the self. So attachment effectively in day-to-day life is the main cause of suffering, the Four Noble Truths would say. But the one that underpins it is the view of the separate self in the first place. And that's the one that's annihilated when we understand dependent arising. So even before when I said the assumption of this I, what attachment is the desperate yearning to get what this I wants. But even that I is a fantasy, is what Buddha is saying. And that's annihilated by understanding dependent arising. So yeah, of course. Is that all Simon has to say?
That's all he said, yeah. If he writes back, I'll tell you.
Good,
He has another follow-up
All right,
question for
good.
you.
All right.
Thank you.
What else? Anything else? Yes.
Question.
Yes, darling.
Do we have to start by sort of telling ourselves nice things to fix
So give me what do you mean by to start with? Tell me what you mean. Unpack that a bit. What's your name?
I'm Jack.
Jack, tell me what you mean, sweetheart.
Wanting to hear nice things from other people
Yes.
instead of trying to get it outside of me. Start by telling myself.
Praising
that.
yourself. Oh no, absolutely. Well, no, very much, definitely, Jack. One of our practices in lessening attachment and becoming our own marvellous person is absolutely, they call it in Buddhism, rejoicing in your good qualities. It sounds kind of boring. We're addicted to finding fault in ourselves. We spend all day, don't we? The central player in our own head is I, and it's always criticising or hearing criticism and being injured by it and offended and hurt, and then desperately craving other people to praise me. So for sure, when we have done a good job and we are making effort, we absolutely must, part of our practice must be to praise ourselves, to delight in our good qualities. And that's different from arrogance. Arrogance is overinflating your good qualities. And that's a lie too. And then low self-esteem is underinflating your bad qualities. And we go between those two all the time. So this one of praising ourselves is very humbling, but we don't like to do it. It's kind of ironic. So absolutely, that is a major part of lessening attachment, because it's lessening dissatisfaction. And it being accepted, this is the one about how we're talking about all the dramas coming and the suffering coming. We've got to every day, okay, I did a good job. I didn't badmouth 14 people, I only badmouthed 7 people, Instead of killing yourself by badmouthing 7, you delight, you didn't. Okay, I'll tell you a story. One of my crazy friends in prison, I worked with people in prison for many years, and one of them, this Mexican ex-gangster from Los Angeles, he'd been in prison, he was in prison for life, and he wrote, after another friend wrote, and he wrote a bit and told me about his anger. How angry he was. He said, I'm very laid back, Robina, but when I get angry, I get really angry. Okay? So anyway, he's in prison for murdering 4 people in the gangs, in Los Angeles, whatever. And eventually I met him. And there he was, covered in tattoos, as they are, these gangsters. And then I said, how's your anger, Richie? And he kind of blushed under his tattoos. And he said, well, Robina, I have to say, I had a fight with my cellie, his cellmate, this morning, and I put his head down the toilet. Then he said, but Robina, I took it out again. So he rejoiced in his practice. No, and I'm not kidding, I rejoiced too that he didn't kill a 5th person. That is rejoicing. So it's a relative thing, Do you understand? And it's really, really, really important we do this. You see, instead of desperately wanting other people to praise us, like the loneliness, why doesn't someone come and love me? This is totally self-centeredness. And it's very deep inside us. But learn to be content with ourselves, which is really hard. We've got to start somewhere. And that begins by praising, by looking at my good qualities. And slowly some real inner feeling comes from this, meaning content, satisfied. It's not abstract. It just seems so hard for us, though. Such a point, Jack. Yeah.
So when you are rejoicing in yourself, then isn't there that fine line that may cross over to ego?
Of course it is, darling. Of course, and you have to risk it though. It's like there's this massively fine line between love and attachment. It doesn't stop us from having relationships. We're going to fall into the trap of attachment every day, but then you've got to work on it. The same with ourselves. Of course it falls into the trap of becoming arrogance, but we never like to say good things about ourselves because we really think it's bad, but we never realise we're saying all these terrible things about ourselves, which are also exaggerations. But nothing stops us from doing those. You see, the very way all the delusions work is they exaggerate, don't they? So when you hate Fred, doesn't Fred look really ugly? He might have only done one bad thing to you, but it's not just one part of Fred looks ugly and the rest looks handsome, right? The whole of Fred looks ugly, doesn't it? Look when we hate ourselves. One bad action we did. You don't just say, oh, well, a part of me is bad, but the rest of me tick the boxes and I'm quite a good person here. We never say that. We say, I am bad. So we're doing it all the time, sweetheart. So risk, please. Risk it by praising yourself, all right? Can I get my point?
Yes.
We just don't, we think it's non-virtuous. You know, when people ask how you are, we don't rave on about the good things. The first thing out of the mouth is word, all the rubbish. You know, I'm this, I did that, oh my God, I fought with my husband. We can't wait to tell someone else the bad things we did, because we don't know how to hold it ourselves. You understand? We don't have to praise ourselves to everybody else, but we really need, and this is why Richie didn't kill the fifth person. I'm not joking. I really did rejoice in his practice. He didn't kill the fifth person. That's progress. We've got to be very humble with ourselves. And it's relative level of practice. And we never do this. We never do it, and we must do it. But if you start daydreaming about how special you are, then it's turned into pride. And then you're supposed to shut up. The Tibetans have a wonderful way of saying it. They say, when you're being arrogant, you remember something you can't do. And it calms you down straight away. When you're having low self-esteem, you remember something you can do, and you pick yourself up. It's immediate. It's wonderful. Such a simple technique. Do you understand? So I know for myself, I don't speak any other language. And as soon as I'm feeling arrogant, all I have to do is remember I just speak Australian. I can't speak Tibetan, French, Spanish, anything else, and I'm quiet. Immediately I'm quiet. That's the thing that I feel ashamed of, you know, that I can't speak other languages. Doesn't matter, whatever. But as soon as I'm feeling smarty pants about something, I just tell myself I can only speak English and I'm quiet. It calms me down. You get my point? And that's why, as soon as you're putting yourself down, it's not natural. We don't like to do it. We don't go there. We've got to tell ourselves something good. It's really so simple, it's embarrassing. But look how hard it is. Because the addiction to criticism is so powerful inside us. It runs like a train, you know. And then we're waiting for someone else to tell us we're nice. And then we don't believe them anyway. So it's like double trouble, you know, ridiculous. As my mother said, we're our own worst enemy, you know. Just got to catch the stories, that's the trouble. That's the trouble. Catch all the roommates. Yes?
I had never heard the term dependent arising.
Okay. That's very, very interesting. You should have heard that term. You like that, do you?
I do.
Good,
I'd like
okay.
to know what it is.
Okay, I'll tell you. I think on one of those days we're going to be going into this, but now that you've asked it, what's your name, please?
Jean.
Jean. Thank you, Jean. Let's talk about it. All right. Well, this is what they call the wisdom teachings in Buddhism. You know, meaning, okay, this is bringing us to the point that I've already indicated. Buddha's general deal is that that sentient beings suffer because of the neuroses in our mind. And the particular function of these neuroses, the general one, like I've said already, is that they don't see things clearly. In other words, we're not in touch with how things exist. We're not in touch with reality. All these neuroses, these delusions, they exaggerate things. So when attachment is there, it makes, you know, everything look more divine than it really is, and you hanker after it, and you think it's going to cause you happiness, and you go crashing down. Then when anger is in the mind, the thing looks really ugly, it's the cause of all something, you want to kill everybody. Then you're depressed. There are always these extreme stories going on in our head, and these are the neuroses, he says, that causes suffering. Okay, so in general, in general what he's saying is we don't have wisdom. We don't have wisdom. We're not seeing things clearly, he says. We're not seeing things clearly. And that's all he means by wisdom in the simplest sense. So the big deal for the Buddha, all these teachings lead us to the more advanced teachings in this wisdom business, when we start to look into in a very focused way how things actually exist. So it's actually, the Dalai Lama, I was reading a while ago, he said it was the Hindus, maybe 3,000 years ago, who started this discussion about what the self is, what does exist and what doesn't. It's about, the Hindus are big into this, you know. And Buddha took the teachings on the self and meaning the nature of how things exist, including the self, and he ran with this in a very particular direction, which is now called Buddhism, the last 2,500 years. And this is the real nitty-gritty of Buddha's teachings that underpin all the things we're describing today. So this is what we learned in wisdom teaching. So, okay, what Buddha's saying, one way of presenting it is, and there's many ways, is that in general, with all these neuroses in our mind, attachment, anger, pride, jealousy, which are the main voices of this root delusion, as they call it, and this is this one of the very nature of a self. The Buddha's saying that we all have this deep, primordial, instinctive belief in a sense of a separate, independent, frozen in space self somehow. And it's a very subtle point, he says. And so what he's saying is, the main way that we suffer as a result of that is that we think there's the way of putting it is we believe utterly there's a sense of an independent self, independent of different things. So the simplest level, he says, we really have this belief in a sense of a self that's permanent, not dependent on causes and conditions, or frozen in space. Then at a more subtle level, we have a very powerful sense of a self that doesn't depend upon all the parts, and I'll go into that one. And the subtlest understanding of dependent arising is that we believe the opposite. We believe there's a self that is existing without depending on concepts and thoughts. So there's different levels of how we grasp at an independent self. Whereas Buddha says everything that exists, including the self, exists interdependently, exists in dependence upon countless factors. In other words, so dependent arising is like, as His Holiness says, it's like the Buddhist slogan, that everything exists interdependently. Everything, there can't be a thing that doesn't exist without depending on something else. So his general teachings about how things exist is that things, and he uses it as a noun, everything is a dependent arising. Things arise in dependence upon this and this and this and this, which seems reasonable enough, we understand it. But he says at this very primordial level, we don't think this. We actually believe there's this little independent, isolated sense of a self, and this is the obvious way it manifests in our daily life, as a sense of an independent, separate, permanent, unchanging, uncaused, real, solid, frozen in space, little kind of me in there. And he says this is a complete fantasy. And so they study this in the Tibetan monastic university system, which comes from the Indian Tibetan monastic university system, the time of after the Buddha, and then they go meditate on this. For 30 years they study it, then they go meditate on it for another 30 years, you know, so I'm trying to get it into 5 minutes here. So another way of putting this, and we're going to be going into this in more detail on whatever day it is that the self, okay, the I, okay, Buddha says there's things exist relatively or conventionally, okay? The world is made up of trillions of different distinct things. We know that. There's carpets and toilets and tables and microphones and flowers and ourselves. So self, person, I, they're all synonymous for the Buddha. Person, self, I, a sentient being, they're all synonymous, basically. And so there is a self, there is a table, there is a carpet, and we first have to establish what a carpet is. We define it, we label it, we all agree that a carpet is this, you know, piece of woolen stuff that softens, you know, to make you stand out on the floor. We all agree what a cushion is, we all agree that a cup is this flat-bottomed container that holds my tea. Then we can begin to describe how it actually exists, because Buddha says we get it right that there's a cup there. We get it right that there's a carpet. But he says because of all these delusions, in particular this root delusion, known as ego grasping, it projects onto the carpet, onto the cup, onto the self, qualities that it just doesn't possess. So his big deal in the wisdom teachings is to investigate the way things exist. He says we don't get it right at the moment. And we have to unpack that to get to see nakedly how things do exist. And that's what he means by liberation. That's what he means by nirvana. We've cut all the misconceptions from the mind and we see things as they exist. And what he means by that is we see them as dependent arisings, which also brings us to understand how they exist ultimately. And this is where the shorthand for this is the word emptiness. That everything exists interdependently. So this discussion of emptiness and dependent arising is all there, is like the summary of how things exist, ultimately and relatively. And there's blah, blah, blah. That's just an overview of it. And we're going to go into more detail. I'm not going to come back again. But, yeah, whatever. So, everything that exists, Buddha says, exists, is a dependent arising. And they use it as a noun. It exists in dependence upon this and that. And we hear that easily enough, but he says when we start to look into how we cling to this neurotic sense of self, it is as if it is not a dependent arising. And this is really quite hard to see. And that's why we have to unpack it and go into it very deeply. An introduction, will that do? All right. What else?
Can you weave that part into love? Into the altruistic one?
Absolutely. The more, okay, we've got the wisdom wing and the compassion wing. And the wisdom wing is all the stuff we're talking about here. Sorting out who I am, where I come from, what is the self, what is this. And then as a result of clinging to the wrong sense of self, I have attachment, anger, and jealousy, and all the pride, all of which are the voices to continue to uphold this sense of self, which Buddha says is a complete fantasy. So the more I have this, the more cut off I am from others, the less sense of dependent arising, the less sense of interdependence, the more miserable I am and the more I harm others. So one of the first levels of practice is lessening the neuroses, lessening attachment, which is the voice of this neurotic self, lessening anger and all the other rubbish, which increases my sense of connectedness with others, which is dependent arising, which also naturally increases my love for others, which is my sense of connectedness with others, which is based in dependent arising. Love is this expansive, when you see another person. So what's your name again? I forgot your name.
Jean.
Jean, okay, Jean. Right, so let's say Jean and I will use an example. Let's say Jean and I were friends and we're chatting away and I'm sympathising with his headache and he sympathises with my knee ache and I, you know, and, you understand? So people will go, oh, look at Robina and Jean, aren't they? They're loving each other. And effectively we are loving each other. I've been kind to Jean, he's been kind to me, I want him to be happy, he wants me to be happy. We understand this, normal, ordinary thing. Well, have a look. Isn't there a feeling of connectedness between us, isn't there? Isn't there a sense of interdependence? Isn't there a feeling of we? You understand? Now look what happens when I insult Jean. Suddenly that we is cut in half, isn't it? And suddenly there's a vivid feeling of I am not this, and you're saying, how dare you do that to me? There's a vivid feeling of two really concrete separate I's, isn't there? So the delusions, the neuroses, are the exact opposite of reality. Reality is that we are interdependent, and you can say that when the virtues are slightly prevalent, there's a sense of connectedness, a sense of calmness, a sense of pleasure, a sense of joy, and that's what the good qualities are, that they're based in reality of interdependence. You kind of see what I'm saying a bit? But they will never go with just compassion. You've got to realise emptiness to finally remove the neurotic sense of self, you know. So all the neuroses are completely reinforcing the sense of a separate individual, poor self-pity, lone, miserable, horrible, stuck in stone, pathetic me, which is ego, which believes I'm independent of this and that, although we don't technically know it. And then all the virtuous qualities are the beginning of actually wisdom, really, because there's a sense of connectedness, a sense of we. And the more you get rid of the rubbish, the more you expand your consciousness to connect with others. And eventually, as the Buddha would say, when you're totally rid of ego altogether, you are full of infinite love and infinite empathy with all sentient beings naturally. It's just natural, you know. So when you get rid of the neurotic self, we shouldn't be worried. We think I'll end up being nothing. No, you're as big as the universe now because you have infinite love and compassion for every single sentient being. There's a sense of incredible connectedness and also the wisdom that sees things as interdependent. So they're very close together, but they've got to be worked on separately. You can work on compassion till the cows come home, but you won't ever get rid of the neurotic I. And you can work on wisdom till the cows come home and never develop infinite love and compassion. But they really help each other. And they're logically connected. I talk fast, it's only 8:30, look. It feels like the end, doesn't it? Doesn't it?
She's right here, she's right here.
Go, darling. Okay, talk to me.
I'm confused. Is
Yes,
dependent arising
Yes.
and emptiness
Yes.
the same?
Yes. Are they the same?
Yeah.
Okay, you could say effectively they're two different ways of saying the same thing. Yes.
The same concept.
They're two different ways of presenting how things exist. And they're connected. So the Buddha would talk about the two truths, okay? One way of presenting all this. And that relative reality, conventional reality, is how things exist conventionally, with all these individual separate things. The more we understand the teaching of dependent arising, how things, all those individual things exist in dependence upon causes, then the next subtle level is that they exist in dependence upon the parts, and the subtlest level of all is they exist in dependence upon the mind, labelling them that. That's the king of logics, as Lama Yeshe puts it, to prove, therefore, there is no table from its own side. Therefore, there is no I from its own side, which is a way of describing emptiness. They're utterly connected. The more you understand dependent arising, the more it leads you to understand emptiness. And the more you understand emptiness, the more it helps you see dependent arising. Yeah.
Thanks.
So,
Yeah? Go.
no,
Yes, we
please.
know. I can't see. Yes.
Me. I'm a new mother.
Yes, darling.
And I love my baby very much. Obviously.
You mean you want your baby to be happy?
Yes, I spend
Definitely.
a lot of my efforts trying to keep my baby happy.
There you go.
And
And you've probably got attachment as well.
I
Do they
take-
look like the most divine baby since sliced bread? Definitely.
Of course.
That's no, not of course, but because that's another quality. And look how mothers who don't have attachment, they're the ones who kill their babies. And so, anyway, never mind. What's your question?
I spend a lot of my efforts trying to make him happy, and I
You
take
do.
great delight in his happiness.
Yes, that's right.
But I also feel that sometimes I'm attached to his happiness, and I wondered
Of
if
course
you
you
could
are.
comment on
Now that's the
how
point.
that
There's no
happens.
question, darling. But I'll put it this way, first of all. Just as well, you have attachment there. First of all, for his happiness, you have actually, that's an interesting point. But forget that first. You've got masses of attachment to this beautiful baby, haven't you? That's okay. I mean, just as well. I'm glad my mother had attachment to me. She would have killed me otherwise. I'm not joking now. But you can imagine if you're living with someone else's baby, who's shitting over the place and screaming and shouting and crying, and they're not even your baby. I can't imagine the pain of this, you know. Do you understand my point? I'm not trying to be horrible. So attached to their happiness, that's a really good point. You're right, you are. And this is the interesting point about attachment, darling. One of the functions of attachment, like I said before, it's actually very scary because it's like a junkie that's desperate to get only the nice things. So that's why you get, we all will get terrible stress, because your love for your baby is definitely want the baby to be happy. But if your baby isn't happy, you go mad eventually, because you will feel like you're a total failure, you're doing the wrong thing, and because attachment can't bear anything but getting something nice. And that's why learning to work with it, sweetheart, and knowing that's just the way it is, then you learn to be reasonable and knowing that you can want your baby to be happy till the cows come home. But please, I'm sorry, I say jokes, but I'm not trying to be mean here. Hitler had a mother as well. And Hitler was not made by his mother. He brought his own junk with him, as far as the Buddha's concerned. If you think of some of these poor kids who go around murdering people. I always think of the recent one, the Connecticut one, the Newton one, wasn't it? No, Newton's in Massachusetts. Where was the one? That boy, I remember reading in Newsweek that some guy's just written a book now about him, because he was fairly quiet. People just thought he was weird, because he didn't go around raging and killing people initially, or shouting and yelling. So no one ever looked at him. They just thought he was weird. So he clearly had a very, 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 very disturbed mind. So I'm hoping your baby doesn't have a disturbed mind. But if your baby has a disturbed mind, darling, you could be the most saintly mother in the universe and your baby will not get happy. So So that's where you've got to be able to understand the nature of attachment, which is a junkie to have nice things. So how fortunate we are if our baby gets happy. But this is what's happening when your baby doesn't get happy. Then you're seeing, you take it as personal, it freaks you out, you get stressed, and that's because of your attachment to have it all be nice. And that's why bad things happening can be very, very powerful practice for us. And that's why you've got to be very reasonable as a mother. Because there's only so much you can do, darling. There's only so much you can do for a baby. Because the baby's their own mind, their own person. You know? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, I should say my baby is delightfully happy and in fact teaches me to smile so
how
much
wonderful.
more. But I just wanted
Yes,
I appreciate
definitely,
your comments on
definitely.
how you can become attached.
One of the,
to
the scary thing of attachment is there's a junkie that only wants nice things. That's why you analyse. You know, let's say, for example, a person. Okay, I'll use an example. A friend of mine. A lot of people, I sort of think there are good girls and bad girls. And you're not one of the good girls. You didn't run around raging and shouting at too many people, okay? So I was one of the bad girls. I got angry easily, okay? Very volatile. Now, but also in my life, I did have love and compassion for the world and want to make the world a better place. So in the 60s, I was this radical lefty, trying to make the world a better place. I worked so hard to make the world a better place. But I included in it anger, shouting and yelling and screaming at the racists and the sexists and the thises and the thatists, do you understand? So then that was all seen as very noble when it's political activity. We think anger's normal and good. Now, another friend of mine, these days, because, you know, these days it's environmentalism before, as well as other things, but this friend of mine who doesn't have the usual anger, she also wants the world to be a better place. So there I was with love, with compassion and altruism, but I also had lots of anger because I had lots of attachment to get what I wanted. So the minute that I didn't sit, the compassion in me saw racism and sexism, so that was, you know, my heart went out. But then my anger, my attachment saw it and got upset, so I got angry. Do you see what I'm saying? So you don't get angry because you have compassion. You get angry because attachment, my attachment, wanted the world to be the way that I wanted it. You get my point? But you don't criticise it when it's political activity because it looks noble. Now, my friend doesn't get angry. She gets depressed. So when she sees the bad environment, she got to the point where she has panic attacks. She can't even open her eyes when her husband's driving the car because she can't better drive the car to see all the ugly trees because she freaks out. And then imagines her children dying in the future and she has panic attacks. So you could say that's internalised aversion. Her attachment also is a junkie to have the world to be nice. Her love and compassion are very noble. But when the attachment is there, that's what causes the suffering. Because attachment is a junkie to only have nice things. Do you see what I'm saying? So when a person like me doesn't get what their attachment wants, it turns into anger. When my friend's attachment doesn't get what it wants, it turns into despair and fear and depression. Can you kind of hear me, people? Because we are junkies for only the nice things. And that's why we've got to have courage to see, let's say, your baby might get sick, might get cancer, might die. To not go, you know, to have the courage to face the problem, to accept it, and not exaggerate our badness, think we're all the cause of it, it's your mother, you know, like my mother, because my father abused some of us and whatever, I love my father, but my mother took all the guilt on herself, so she was deeply depressed and thought she was the cause of all the suffering. Do you understand? But she exaggerated, she just wasn't. Each person, the Buddha would say, brings their own stuff with them. The father brings something, the mother brings, and the baby brings something. So we're in this three people all in this role together, and each of us has to look at our part and only know that's my part, and the others bring their parts, you know. I'm just raving on it, but you understand my point? But attachment is like a junkie or like a baby that only can bear the nice things, and that's why I'm not underestimating. Look at our suffering when really terrible things happen. People literally go mad. They can't bear the pain because that's the function of attachment. So don't treat it as something kind of cute. It's a deep, deep mental illness for the Buddha. A deep, terrible mental illness. The normal stress and panic we have every day, that's the attachment gone mad because it's not getting what it wants. Because we just can't bear the pain sometimes of all the bad things happening on this earth. Whether it's the husband leaving or the kids sick or just the ordinary daily pain of life, you know. So giving up attachment is not some cute thing. It's profound and it makes you incredibly brave. It makes you brave and never give up practicing love and compassion. Never give up. They talk about the courage of the Bodhisattva who's given up attachment, who can confront the most garbaged up world and never give up on it. That's the courage of the Bodhisattva. And that comes from giving up attachment and then adding love and compassion to it. You understand, people? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's kind of intense stuff, you know. But slowly, slowly, people, one little baby step at a time, okay? And at the end of the day, before you go to sleep, rejoice in your progress. Rejoice that you didn't kill that 5th person. Incredible. For me, I love that. Just that story blew my mind, you know. I couldn't believe it. And I took it out again, he said. I couldn't believe it. Anyway. Time to go home, I think, isn't it? Isn't it? Well, 8:45. Whatever. Yes, darling.
So, as far as I understand so far, is that attachment is based on ego and personal.
That's right.
What happens if you're attached to someone else's attachment?
What do you mean by that?
In the sense of that, usually children are sometimes attached to the dreams that their parents have for them.
Of course, yes.
So it's a cycle more. It's like it stops being personal there. It's not your own ego. It's
Okay, well that's very much, you know, I got a feeling that's... Okay, listen to this. I remember a while ago hearing about this Australian nurse, happened to be in London, and I read about it in the UK paper, The Guardian. And it's very, very moving, this. She worked with the dying. And she came up, she'd written a book called The 5 Greatest Regrets of the Dying. And listen to this one. The greatest regret of all is not following my heart and doing what I wanted to do, but doing what I thought other people expected me to do. And that's the attachment to what other people think. That's the attachment to reputation, which is so scary. And it looks like kindness and goodness. So what we have to learn to do is know what I want. Know what I think and know what I want, and extricate ourselves from our parents' wishes. And that's terrifying. In many cultures, you just can't do it. Literally, you can't do it. You've just got to do what your parents think. And it can destroy.
But love is altruistic, right?
Love is an altruistic state of mind that wants the other person to be happy. It doesn't say that you must make them happy, because that's not your job. You must want them to be happy. That's fine. But if I have to leave my mother, which I did, and she cried, and go off and be a Buddhist nun, I had to have I mean, I'm not trying to praise myself. I knew that was what I had to do. And it was my right to do that. My mother was, of course she was in tears, sad. But I knew from my past experience, because when I became a hippie and gave up God, she got over it. And then when I became a feminist, she got over it. Then I became a communist, she got over it. So my poor darling mother, one more time, I knew she'd get over it. But I had to have the courage to do what I had to do. And if my mother never gave up attachment to me doing what she wanted, I can't help that. And that's the courage we have to have. Because I am not my mother's daughter from the day till the time, you know. I am when she's my mother and she's responsible, but I'm my own person. I must find out what I need and want. And that itself is terrifying.
Can I add?
Well, of course you can.
But the sense of like wanting to make someone happy, because obviously the child wants to make their parents happy.
No, no, I would suggest the child frantically wants mummy to approve of them. That's attachment, baby. They also want them to be happy. But it's not their job to make them happy. Because if the mother is super attached, which of course she is to her child, and wants her child to do what she wants, that child could give their mother their blood, and they still won't be happy, because the child doing what the mother wants is not the cause of the happiness of the mother. Her giving up her attachment is the cause of her happiness. That's right. It's really tricky and very hard to see, and especially with a mother and child, it's so entangled. And we need great courage. That top regret, that I didn't follow what I wanted, that I did what I thought other people expect, and it sounds noble, but it's not. It's fear of what other people think. It's called thinking, I don't want to upset them. But it's total attachment, terror of upsetting somebody, because you can't bear the pain of it. It's very hard to see, sweetheart. It can be selfishness, of course it can. We have to be able to see the difference by looking into our own mind. There's no shortcut. And have the courage to do what we have to do. And we have to learn from it. But my job is not to do what my mother wants, necessarily. Now, put it this way. If you decide that your life is to sacrifice yourself for your mother, and you can be happy doing that, then hey baby, go for it. But when you do it out of attachment, it's not happiness, it's torture. So a person who wants to sacrifice their life and look after their darling mother until they die, that's very noble, but it's got to come from the right, it's got to be coming from the right place. That's amazing, that's sacrificing themselves, that's incredible. But that's not what we're talking here. That's genuine love. It truly puts others first. And that's a highly advanced thing to do. Are we communicating a bit? Okay.
So,
yes. Yes.
How about in the situations like that? How about the pain that I caused my mother?
Okay, you've got to analyse that again. You've got to really see if you did cause your mother pain. So did you do something? Okay, I'll use myself as an example, not you, you know. In my life, if I look back, I was mean to my mother, definitely mean to her. Unkind, I swore at her, I got angry with my mother, I did all those things. But if I look at my life, I made choices to do things that looked like I was being selfish. But that's my right as a human being to go off and be a feminist if I want to be a feminist. It's my right to find what I think my political position is, to go off. It was my right to go off and be a communist and do that because I was driven by the wish to see the world as be a better place. My mother initially was shocked by that and upset by that and hurt by that and worried about me when I went off hitching around Europe, you know, my hair down to my, you know, with high heels and red lipstick, demanding men to rape me practically. Of course my mother was worried. So I can say I was selfish by not thinking about my mother. But I was 25. My mother will worry about me until I was 95 if she lived that long. But that's not my job by then. My job is to lead my life. Of course, you see, also the other point is this. We tend to assume if my mother, let's say, is really neurotic and really worried easily, then no matter what I do, she'd get upset. I couldn't even breathe, she'd get upset. So at some point, you have to realise that each person's got their own stuff. So a mother who's very loving and generous might not have been worried about their daughter, even the one who did bad things, because she was a wise mother. So because my mother's neurotic, that's not my responsibility. It's just not my responsibility. And that's why we've got to have wisdom. There's only so much we can do to make a person happy. So if my mother has a bottomless pit of attachment to have everything to be the way she wants it, which is what attachment is, then no matter what I do, it will make her unhappy. And this is what makes us, as children, nearly go mad. Because we think the sign of success is mummy's happy. Then I give her this arm, then I give her that arm, and she can have that blood, and she can take this eye, and she's still not happy. You go mad. You just go mad. So we have to have wisdom. But it's really hard and very scary. You've got to risk it. Are we communicating a bit? So I must take responsibility for whatever I did was wrong to my mother. I was mean to my mother. I was unkind. I swore at her. I didn't care what she felt. It's true. I have to be responsible for that. But in terms of making my life choices, that's my right as a human being. And this is the Buddha's point. You see, the Buddha's point, the materialist point, I don't know what other people's points are, is that my mother made me. She literally created Robina. That to me is pretty heavy duty. There's a big demand there. Whereas the Buddha says, I merely have a karmic connection with my mother and she very kindly provided me with a womb. But I'm my own person. I brought my mind with me. So at some point it is, bye-bye mum, see you later baby. It is, of course it is. It's natural. And it's only because of attachment that my mother suffers. It's really hard to see this. Because if my mother's really neurotic, and I'm frantic like a junkie to see mummy smile, because why? I want her to approve of me. That's my attachment. And then if mummy approves of me, I feel I'm off the hook now. So we've got to accept that if my mummy's got strong attachment for me, she will never be happy no matter what I do. So I've got to have the courage to make my choices and let mummy be and love her for who she is and let her be needy and let her be manipulating and let her be angry at me and let her do those things. That's her problem. But this is very hard to do because my attachment is why she freaks me out. It's like a minefield, isn't it? Whew. Time to go. So we delight in and all this 2 hours of hard work, as many thoughts as each of us has had, is as many seeds each of us has planted. We might not remember 90% of it. It doesn't matter. It's all gone in, okay? You've programmed your mind. So we think, may we take some of this, if it's useful, may we nourish these seeds we planted, may we never give up, developing our amazing qualities, developing wisdom, developing compassion, finding our own way in this, using the tools that make sense to us, so we can develop our incredible potential, so we can be of amazing benefit to all these suffering sentient beings, because we're all in this crazy, insane asylum together. And if I don't help them, who will? I'm thinking like this, you know. Kewadinyu dudar lama sange drugyune drowa chikyang malupan dei sala make a passion grow and grow. Jang chod sem chog rinpoche, ma kye panam ke gyochi, kye panyam pa me payang, gong ne gong du kawasho. All right. Thank you.
Birthday
to
you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Robina. Happy birthday to you.
It wouldn't be a chocolate cake, would it? Oh, all right. Slices, chocolate. Whoops.
I'll just make some announcements. Will you do that?
You go on.
Okay. So Robina will be here through the first week of January. And tomorrow she's from 2 to 4 Saturdays. Robina is beginning a 3-part series, so it will be the next 3 Saturdays, 2 to 4 in the afternoon. That one is on making a daily spiritual practice of your own. Okay? How to integrate spiritual understanding into your life. 3-part series. Then on Sundays, there'll be Robina's going to start a 2-part series for 2 Sundays, and that is 10 to 12 a.m. And that is on karma and dependent origination. What does an interconnected life mean? So Robina started on that. In addition, there's a couple of Thursday nights. There's nothing like Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, 24th, 25th. But evening classes are 7 to 9 generally, like tonight. So the main thing is check the calendar on the website. If Kurukulla.org is the website. And also if there are any weather events like we've had in the last week or something, updates are on the website. So if you're, coming, and remember, there could be snow here and no snow an hour from here. So before you drive, just make sure